Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I want to dive into. So let's dive into those. First question I have is actually from YouTube today. I thought this was a really good here, and it was hard to just explain through typing, so I wanted to go over it. First, I appreciate the question. If you do watch on YouTube, you drop your questions here, and I try to get to them if they're relatively short, but this one was a little bit longer, so I wanted to answer it. So basically, somebody mentioned that he believes that the calorie deficit is the number one thing when it comes to weight loss and things like that. But he believes there are things that can affect weight loss besides that. And generally, I agree. I think that's a great point he makes. I think we need to address water retention as well. I've seen my weight change 10 pounds in 24 hours from eating and drinking bad food. I believe hormonal imbalance from bad diet and stress can have a huge impact on water retention and potentially impact metabolic rate. I just can't accept that eating 2,000 calories of Twinkies is equivalent to 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef. He basically said that long-term, he thinks there would be a difference in overall weight and body composition. And what do I think on that? And I think this is a great question. I love it. And there's a lot of things I want to dive into. I think the overarching question here is 2,000 calories of Twinkies equivalent to 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef. And that's the main question that I want to tackle, but he does mention a few things in here that I do want to chat about. So let's start with that. Look, at the end of the day, 2,000 calories of Twinkies is going to be 2,000. It's going to be equivalent to 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef. From a caloric, if we're just looking at calories, your body is going to utilize those calories the same way it would, whether it's from no matter what the food source is, right? So at the end of the day, if you were able to actually only eat just 2,000 calories of Twinkies and just 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef, depending on how many calories you burn throughout the day, it's going to be the same, right? If you expend 2,500 calories per day, you're going to be in a 500 calorie deficit, right? And you would lose weight. Now, obviously, so basically what I'm trying to get at there is from a calorie standpoint, it's the same. However, this person does make some good points and that there's probably some differences, and there certainly is, right? So obviously the first main difference is going to be obviously the macronutrient breakdown of that particular food. From a body composition standpoint, 100%, if 2,000 calories of Twinkies versus 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef, one's going to be way under protein. You're not going to get really any protein from the Twinkie. And again, it's probably not high quality protein either. So that's the first thing where, yes, you'd start to see differences in body composition from that standpoint over time if you did that day over day, right? And then if we're not also weight training in that process, that's also going to impact your body composition. I'm a huge proponent of muscle, right? And again, just eating Twinkies is probably not going to be great from that standpoint. So that's where we first start to see the differences here of this. Next is fiber. Now, grass-fed beef obviously isn't going to have any fiber. If I'd have to double check that, but very minimal amounts of fiber in it. Twinkies also not going to. So again, we can take any kind of type of food here. It doesn't have to just be Twinkie versus grass-fed beef. We do start to see differences in terms of fiber, right? Fiber is going to help with satiety. Obviously, it's going to help with your GI as well, to your gut health, your digestion. So there's that difference, right? We also have differences in texture. Different 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef is probably going to be a lot more satiating than 2,000 calories of Twinkies, right? So again, the texture of it, right? Twinkies are a softer kind of food. Grass-fed beef's a little bit more chewy. You have to really chew it up. There's going to be more chewing that's involved with it, right? And that is going to be something that's going to impact the satiety aspect of it, right? We just know that in generally speaking, harder foods are going to be a little bit more satiating than, say, softer types of foods as well. So again, that's going to play a big role in it. The processing of it's obviously going to play a role in it, right? Twinkies are obviously there to really maximize the taste aspect of it, right? And so again, typically those are going to be the macro breakdown of it's going to be higher in fat and higher in added sugar, right? And that's that magic kind of food combo that's going to lead to like overconsumption and wanting more. And then the micronutrients, right? Again, obviously grass-fed beef is going to have way more micronutrients. It's going to provide a lot more vitamins and minerals than, say, Twinkie, which is basically going to provide nothing from that standpoint. And that's obviously going to have trickle-down impacts on how you feel from day to day, right? And so all these things can impact how you feel, because again, if we're not getting any micronutrients in, that's going to impact how our body works over time. And it's going to, again, if 2,000 calories of Twinkies is going to be way less satiating than 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef, that's going to impact, if you're not aware of these things and you don't have other strategies in place, that's going to impact how much you actually eat, right? So if you're actually able to eat 2,000 calories of Twinkies, yes, you're going to miss out on a ton of micronutrients as well over time, which is going in vitamins and minerals, which is going to impact how you feel, how your body, how just your overall health is from that standpoint, right? But it's also going to impact the satiety as well too, which in turn is going to be very challenging to just eat those 2,000 calories. In saying that, I think that just to having 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef is also not the best approach to nutrition as well, right? So again, I think it's more of just the point of this code or this question is that at the end of the day, calories are going to be the thing that's going to manipulate body weight. However, again, we have to dive deeper into it, and that's what's really going to impact body composition, overall health. And again, the satiety aspect is something that we also need to consider, which again, in the short term, you could do this for maybe say a week, but again, that's not going to be great from an overall health standpoint. But long term, yes, it's going to be very hard to actually eat 2,000 calories. He definitely does have a point there, and I agree with that. But again, what I'm trying to get at here is 2,000 calories is still 2,000 calories. Now, there is way more that goes that we need to break down, but it is 2,000 calories. And I think this comes from I believe there was a professor that did the Twinkie diet, and he ate mostly just Twinkies. Maybe it was, I think that's what it was. And he did drop weight, and his health markers were relatively solid after, I think, like 30 days. However, I believe he did eat some like veggies in there, right? So again, he's trying to make a point here of just eating Twinkies, but he still made sure he got some veggies in that process as well. But like I said, I think just eating grass-fed 2,000 calories of grass-fed beef is also not great. But again, that's 2,000 calories of chicken breast. If you just eat that, you are obviously going to be missing out on some vitamins and minerals. Because again, if there was one food that did everything, we would know about that, right? I think again, it also goes to show, hey, we want to get some variety in our diet as well too. And so really what this leads me to is, and he mentioned this in his post too, he said, I've seen my weight change 10 pounds in 24 hours from eating and drinking bad food. And this is where I want to hit on this more of this kind of quote unquote bad food. That's where I try to really be careful with labeling things like that. And I think if we just look at scale weight and like whatnot, this can lead you to like thinking foods are good and bad. Again, there's really what I try to get at here is, hey, we want to have a good base of whole foods, right? Again, these foods that are going to provide protein, that are going to provide fiber, that are going to provide the vitamins and minerals that we need. Again, some of them are a little bit higher food volume, right? We want to have a good base of that stuff in. But from there, once we get that in, so long as we account for the total caloric intake, it's like you can really add in whatever you want. And I think that this is where this kind of like thought process of good and bad foods can be very detrimental, because I've seen this happen many times with clients where they're like, oh, I went off track. I ate this food. I went off plan. I had this food. I had this food, this food that made me, that's a quote unquote bad food. And it leads to them feeling bad about their choices, and they're just not maybe health focused because they had that type of food. And again, I just think that couldn't be further from the truth. And so really what it comes down to is I wanted to make this point that there really is no good or bad food. There's going to be foods that provide these things that we need. And then there's going to be foods that, again, maybe you're somebody who does want some pleasure from food. We can fit some of this in, but it becomes an issue when the ratio of these foods gets out of whack as well too, right? That's a big thing, right? So like, again, the Twinkies, okay, 2,000 calories of Twinkies. Again, that's a very extreme example of this, but you can see where eventually you get to that point to where now you're not getting enough protein. You're not getting enough fiber. You're missing out on micronutrients, right? So again, it's finding that happy medium. And this is also going to be very dependent on what phase of nutrition you're in, right? And this is where I'm a huge proponent of periodizing your nutrition, where it's, hey, if we're actively trying to drop body fat, our calories are going to be lower. And again, we have less calories to work with. And then on top of it, the more of that, if that ratio starts to go more towards calorie dense foods, say things like Twinkies, you're going to run into those issues that I talked about of higher hunger. You're going to be missing out on vitamins and minerals. So again, maybe in that specific case, say 4, 6 to 12 weeks, we're going to be a little bit more rigid with what we're doing. But then outside of that, we can be more flexible. But we're never getting to the point to where we're just eating all processed foods, because that's where you will run into issues. Again, you're going to be missing out on all those things that I talked about there. So hopefully that makes sense. I just want to hit on a couple other things he mentioned as well too, about the bad food and seeing your weight change 10 pounds in 24 hours. That's, again, I don't think seeing water weight change is that big of a deal, right? Again, usually these kind of quote unquote bad foods are going to be a little bit higher in sodium. So you're probably retaining some water there from that standpoint. If you're somebody who, let's say you were eating super clean, healthy, you're in a calorie deficit, and then you eat these types of foods and you had a ton of them. Now you have a lot more food in your system. You're going to see your water weight increase. You're also going to, if you were low carb and you added in some carbs, you're going to hold on to a little bit of water weight from that perspective. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But also for some people, maybe some of these quote unquote bad foods, you may have some sort of issues with them, and that could cause you to retain some water weight, right? So maybe it's, again, the moderation aspect that we need to look at. Also with drinking, yeah, that can lead to poor sleep, when maybe you're just a little bit more inflamed the next day. Maybe that heart rate's a little bit higher. Again, those are going to be things that can impact you. Alcohol, it can be a stressor on the gut, which could lead to some issues and some water weight retention the following day. So again, we need to take that into consideration. And then hormonal imbalances, yeah, yeah, stress definitely can have a huge impact on water retention, no doubt. In stress, there are some trickle down impacts of, say, things like stress on, say, things, testosterone, which can impact your metabolic rate, right? Again, I do think we need to make sure that we are taking care of our lifestyle, as that could impact your metabolic rate slightly, right? Hopefully that all makes sense. I just want to touch on that just a little bit more there, but hopefully that gives you an insight into how we think about foods. And again, I think the big thing is just moving away from this like thought of, oh, hey, I had bad food, that's bad. Like, I want to get away from, again, food. We need to think of food as, hey, what is it doing? What is its purpose? And again, it's okay if you have a good base of whole foods to have some food for pleasure. Again, that's not necessarily bad. Again, so we just need to take that into consideration there. So great question. Hopefully that answers it. Again, you can obviously give me any follow-ups to that if you have them from there. All right, so I want to go into the second question. Is it better for muscle growth to have more than 1 gram per pound of body weight? I thought this was a great question. So is it better? Actually, no. If you go north of that 1 gram per pound of body weight, you're not going to see any sort of like increase in muscle growth past a certain point, right? Now, obviously, if you're this is under the assumption that you are weight training and you're pushing your training, right? Because that's going to be the bigger kind of factor here with this. Protein completes the process, but in order for us to actually build muscle, we need to make sure we lift weights. So that's obviously priority number one. But again, once we get past that 1 gram per pound of body weight, you're not going to see like extra muscle growth benefits from doing that. And this is a big thing that I see, especially with protein, of like people thinking that more is better. And again, there's some other benefits of protein, but from a muscle building standpoint, once we go past that 1 gram per pound of body weight, it's like we pretty much maxed out the muscle gain benefits of it. And from that point, it's going to be more about your calories and your training from that standpoint. And really, muscle growth is just a slow process, and we just have to be patient, right, with it. But if you're at your high end of maintenance calories or a small surplus, you can honestly probably get away with a little bit less of protein for muscle growth, right? Maybe as low as like 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. Again, just to be on the safe side, I went and to just make things more simple, I would just stick with 1 gram per pound of body weight. If you have a day or two where you're a little bit lower than 1 gram, it's like you don't really need to stress it, especially if like sleep's there, you're eating enough calories, and like training is there as well too. Anything past 1 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight is just going to be more out of like preference and the potential like satiety aspect of it. So if you are someone who enjoys a little bit higher protein, by all means, you can go more than 1 gram per pound of body weight. You also may get a small satiety benefit from eating more protein over that 1 gram per pound of body weight, which can help you maybe eat at your maintenance or in a small surplus and help you maybe prevent excess fat gain while being in this, right? Whereas if you're somebody who you drop down to say 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, now all of a sudden you start to add in a little bit more tasty food, and that all of a sudden adds in 500-600 extra calories potentially because you're not getting that satiety benefit from protein. Then again, that could be a use case for getting more protein in. But again, it's important that we understand that's not going to help add more muscle past that point. And then obviously in a deficit, to be safe and for the satiety benefits, I would probably aim for 1 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. I wouldn't push that 0.7 grams per pound of body weight when we're in a energy deficit. And then this obviously is even more important as you get leaner and your deficit is larger as well too. So again, I think just to be safe from a deficit standpoint, you probably do want to make sure you hit that 1 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight there. So really the takeaway here is you're not going to be able to protein your way to more muscle growth there, right? Again, we need to make sure we're training, eating enough calories, getting good sleep, and then from there, protein helps complete this process of adding more muscle. So great question. Last question of the day. Is it easier to gain muscle below 10% body fat or at higher body fat, say like 15% or more? And for women, we can add about 5 to 8% onto these numbers, right? Because that's typically So when you get or are this lean, building muscle is actually going to be tougher in most cases, okay? You'll likely need to put on a little bit of body fat to build more muscle. If you are super shredded and super lean and you try to maintain that, but you also want to add muscle, it's going to be really hard to do that. You're probably going to need to be in a small surplus and add some body fat for this process to really happen. So again, in that scenario here where you're super lean, you're going to have a much tougher time building muscle than say if you're at 15 to say 20%, or for women, say 25 to 30%. But in saying that, some people do have great genetics and they can get away with being leaner and not have any issues. So genetics do play a role here. There are people that can walk around pretty shredded and still be in a good spot to build muscle. And again, that's mostly a genetic thing. But it's also important that everything outside of the gym is on track as well too. If you're someone who's sub 10% body fat, you're trying to build as much muscle as possible, but sleep sucks, your nutrition's off, you're not getting enough protein. It's like, well, you're not going to build the amount of muscle that you want. So you're better off if you are fairly lean, hey, getting all those things on track first, seeing what happens. And then it's probably, again, you're probably going to have to build some body fat. So again, being too lean can impact your body's ability to add muscle. So again, unfortunately, if that's our main goal, we're probably going to have to put on some body fat to do that. But I also want to take this on the other extreme too, where a lot of people say that if you're at higher body fat levels, you can't build muscle. And that's actually not the case. You're actually still able to build muscle at higher body fat levels. So if you say you're overweight and it's, I need to drop weight first to be able to build muscle, that's actually false. You can still build muscle at higher body fat levels. So again, if you are somebody in that scenario, you should still focus on adding muscle. Now, the more overweight you are, the less likely and the less I'm going to push you to be in a calorie surplus to build muscle, right? You can still do it and you'll build muscle, but at that point, it's like now you're going to add more body fat to what you already have, which is probably not great from an overall health perspective. From a look perspective, you're not really going to you're not really going to see that muscle. So you're going to feel like you're not really making any progress, right? So I think really the takeaway here is you can still build muscle at higher body fat levels and you should, but we probably don't need to be in a calorie surplus when we're at those higher body fat levels. You're better off being around your maintenance, or in some scenarios, really seeing that recomp and being in a small deficit and building muscle there. And that's really with these kind of, again, we can be at any body fat level and build muscle, but again, the body fat level is going to determine if somebody's in a calorie surplus for me. So again, the leaner you are, the more muscle you want to build, the more likely we're going to be in a small calorie surplus to build muscle. The less lean you are, the less likely we are to be in a energy surplus to build muscle. We can be at maintenance. And again, if your body fat levels are super high, we can also be in an energy deficit and build muscle. And like I said, there would be no downside to being in a small surplus if you say you're at higher body fat levels. But again, it just comes down to you're adding more body fat, which is that great for overall health? Probably not. Again, and then the look aspect of it, you're not going to really be able to see the muscle that you're building. And third, if you ever do want to get leaner, that's more body fat that now you're going to have to lose when you don't necessarily need to add more body fat to build muscle. So that's where I'm at on that. But the big takeaway is no downsides to, like, muscle growth is not going to be impacted at higher body fat levels, but it will be impacted at very low body fat levels there. So really, what I've changed my mind on is when we're in phases outside of fat loss, it's getting you to a comfortable body fat percentage where you don't have too much body fat, but you feel good, you can easily maintain it, and you can still push training and everything like that. And so again, this may look like for some people they have a period of time where they're in a small surplus, they get to a certain body fat percentage, and now we maintain that. That's how that can look for some people in that. Or for some people, it's just they have that small weight gain over time in even smaller deficit. So again, there's multiple ways to get there, but really the big thing is finding those kind of comfortable body fat levels in those phases outside of the fat loss phase where, hey, you feel good, you still feel like you look good, you're able to push training and everything like that. So hopefully that answers that, but great questions today. That's it for this episode. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, that will help more people find this podcast. So appreciate everybody who listens. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. The link to that is in the show notes. I also have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization. So I go over each nutrition phase, what they are, how to do them, common adjustments, common mistakes. So everything you need to know about each nutrition phase. Again, the link to that is in the show notes. And if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff. That's where I'm most active on social media. That's where I answer questions for this podcast. So again, make sure you give me a follow there. And then lastly, if you have questions on how to set up your diet, again, how to set up your training, how many days per week do you need to train, what's the deficit you need to be in, then my free 30-minute strategy call is for you. The link to that is in the show notes, and I look forward to chatting with you. And that's it for this episode. Talk to you next time.